Today we're here and I'm going to be cleaning up these leaf springs. Some people might look at this and say, boy, what a waste of time. Other people might say, oh, I like the way he's really cleaning everything up so it looks like it's brand new.
We got a couple washers in there. We're going to try to push the whole works out at once and see what happens.
Some smashed washers in there.
That wasn't too bad. We're at the end of another day here. We're looking at this bottom like half leaf and it appears like it's date coded, 1967. Wonder if it's the original. I did notice on these drums when I sent them in to get them cut that they had the same undercoating on them that was sprayed on the car. So I suspect that those are the original brake drums. We got the springs in an etch primer here. Probably should have did the rear end in an etch primer too. Did a quick scuff with 320. This is actually a gloss, so I hope it doesn't stick out too bad. So I was doing some research on Eaton and they said you're not supposed to paint these or powder coat them or nothing in between the leaves, because what'll happen is the friction from the leaves rubbing on each other will wear off the coating and then they'll become loose. You can either crank down the bolts or not have that stuff in there. So we're just gonna take a strapping wheel and then clean it off wherever it's gonna be rubbing.
That's the same kind we used when we were doing the stripping of the paint on the Oldsmobile hood. And I talked about how when you use sandpapers and stuff, they just load up so fast. And here you got brand new fresh paint. It would fill up 80 grit sandpaper like that. You'd be constantly changing sandpaper. Usually when you use sandpaper, you're going for the fastest speed on the edge. And then you're running out of that space and you're letting more level. This has a place for the crap to go and it just keeps debriding away and you get new material, so it's a lot faster.
We got the paint off the springs where they're going to bolt up. We're going to assemble these springs now.
This stuff is a product called Delrin, and Eaton Corporation that makes the springs sells this, and it's 2.5 inch for the width of the springs that we have, and it's virtually indestructible. Way better than rubber.
You can see it's double ribbed too, so it doesn't slip out of the spring.
Sides.
I had to look around a little bit for this. They also had the square clips that you pop in here, made out of the same material. And you'll see those in a minute. We're going to cut this up and make isolators in between these springs. We're going to try to use up all the material we have and see what we end up with.
This is another situation, a simple project like leaf springs. And I thought he was wussy for not taking apart both of them at the same time, but he's adamant about if you're doing brakes or whatever, just do one side at a time, and then you always got something to go back and reference to. Now, I don't know if just somebody haphazardly cut these, you know, just because they look that way, but we're going to copy exactly the way they were. And you can see where the U-bolts go and where the clamp goes. They're going to have to be relieved a little. You can tell where the front of the spring is and where the rear of the spring is, because this distance from here to here is different than from here to there. Now this is, they stack up stiffer because that's where the pinion wants to climb when you're accelerating, so they're trying to resist that from happening. And back there is where your suspension goes on, you know, and the shackle moves back there.
You can see the distance that these leaves are stepped off in the front is much shorter than on the back side. So we left this together to make sure that we get this first one back together correctly. We're doing some ciphering here, trying to figure out how much material we got. We realized that we got to put these square jobbers in here.
easier said than done. Let's use the vise. Yeah, I got it. They're just a little difficult.
We're using like a rubber tube cutter to cut it. You got to get a hole in the material for this. We're just going to use our gasket maker. But the length of this on the back end of the spring becomes an issue with this floating around. We'll just trim it down some. We're just going to cut the ribs off of this so our U-bolts fit. And then we're going to trim the front side for the, we're going to band these springs.
You can see where the clamps used to ride here and right here.
We're going to try this new caulk removal tool I just got to trim these things.
Makes it a little bit more leverage with two hands rather than just one hand using an X-Acto knife.
There is a lot of control with this.
Yeah, you got to steer the blade. So we're going to clamp the leaf springs together so we don't put any strain on these threads. You know, if you tighten it down with it, I'm sure you could, but I've already snapped one. So we're going to pull them evenly as tight as we can, and there won't be any load on this little wimpy bolt. And then get that as tight as we can. Remember, this doesn't hold it together. You got two big U-bolts that are holding the thing all together after it's in the car. Okay, it's tight.
All right.
So instead of having some rusty old leaf springs that it actually rode really nice before, my brother had a 68 Javelin that he put a 350 Chevy engine in it. My brother got in this car after he got this thing running, and they went for a ride around the block, and he's like, man, I'm amazed at how nice it rides for a 68. I couldn't believe it either. I mean, usually you get into some of these old cars and they feel like you're back in 1968, but this thing doesn't really squeak. It stays planted and doesn't wallow over in the corners. It really rides nice. So it might even get better with these leaf springs cleaned up and with this plastic in between them.
I don't know if I like this plastic hitting each other like this. What do you think about that, Paul?
I don't think anything about it. I'm going to be able to sleep perfectly tonight without even worrying about this plastic touching each other.
This was a heck of a lot of work to get rid of this box here. But we're going to try to press in these bushings now. We're using the vise to push in the bushings.
I made a mistake here. I ended up putting a washer down, and then you'll see how once you want to put this plate on here, it would teeter. So we got to clamp it, take the nut off, get the washer off, and put it back on with no washer. You can tell somebody at one time tightened up these nuts so much that these were starting to bend. But it's a lot flusher now.
When we put our U-bolts on, we'll torque them to spec. You're not supposed to reuse U-bolts.
If you ever run into the situation like we had, where we were trying to get the bolt out of the spring pocket on the front leading bushing, it didn't want to come out. It was froze to the sleeve, and we were fighting with it. You got it to turn finally, but the whole sleeve inside was stuck to this, and it wouldn't let the bolt come through. And I'm just going, just cut it! Cut it! We'll just get a new bolt. Guess how much this bolt cost for two of them? $87. So if you're ever thinking about cutting that bolt, think twice and try to, take your time, spray some more lubricant in it. I don't know what you got to do, but we could have done this on the lathe, just getting the bolt this size turn it down and then put some threads on it, but you know, nobody works for free nowadays, and then with shipping, came to a total of 87.
Came with the hardware. Looks like he had a center on there when he did it. I mean, this is probably $15 for the hardware,
Right.
maybe even 20, just without machining it.
A lot of people would have chucked the old springs and said, oh, I need new springs. And they were like $500. Well, we put in $500 worth of labor because we sanded them all down, put that liner in between there, our time. So we saved $500, but it's, you gotta have the labor of love to fix the car up and not just keep throwing money.